So Edgar Lin is a junior at the University of Chicago studying math and philosophy. Edgar graduated from Harker in 2018 and was vice president of the philosophy club. Today, he'll be speaking on why we should do moral philosophy, even when it can be time consuming. Here's Edgar.
Hey, so, well, if I know anything about this audience, I could say, well, two things, right? First of all, you guys are interested in philosophy, especially moral philosophy. You're listening to a moral philosophy talk at Harker PhilCon, after all. So, and there's probably a good contingent of you who are graduating and you're excited to go off to college and take those cool philosophy classes. The second thing is that most of you are not going to become philosophy professors. Not that many people do. And if things haven't changed too much since the last time I was on this campus, this room, okay, I will probably talk about this room several times, and like just imagine you are in an actual lecture hall instead of in a webinar. This room is probably majority future STEM majors, probably plurality future CS majors, at least. So, and right, what does this tell me? This seems to tell me that most of us here believe that it's important for people who are not going to become professional philosophers to do some philosophy, especially moral philosophy. And why might we believe that? Well, one reason we might have for believing that non-philosophers should do moral philosophy is that we believe that it's important for everybody to do some of their own thinking about what their values are. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, that's the belief that I want to interrogate in this talk. Well, why shouldn't we do our own thinking about our values? Number one, the alternative to doing your own thinking about your values isn't not to have any moral values whatsoever. It's, well, to adopt the sort of background consensus values, right? Or the background values of our society, right? To adopt other people's values. And, well, you know, if we're going to have some epistemic humility here, right, we might wonder, right, why we think that trying to figure out our own values is going to get us something that's that much better than that of our background society, right? Why do you think that you doing moral philosophy, right, thinking about thought experiments are going to get to better values than the person sitting to your left and the person sitting to your right, right? What then if you just average those two people together? Or if you were to find someone you think is morally exemplary, right? Someone you think is very good at moral thinking, and just adopt or defer to their values instead of trying to find your own, right? Why do you think you personally trying to find your own values is going to get you great values? After all, in other fields, right, we do believe that a lot of epistemic deference is not only reasonable, but also recommendable. If you go and ask an economist, right, hey, what stock should I buy? When should I be buying them? They're going to say, no, you should not be trying to figure out, right, what stocks to buy or when to buy them on your own. You should defer to the market consensus and buy an index stock, right? Because chances are the society consensus, right, all the millions and millions and millions of other people and their combined knowledge, some of whom are professionals, right, who do this full time and know a lot more than you, chances are that society knows what's the how much stocks are worth much better than you, right? So if epistemic deference is good for picking stocks, why is it bad for picking moral values, right? Why not, why not put your moral values in whatever equivalent of a moral index factor is, right? The other thing is that, well, even if you think that you should try to improve your moral values, trying to do moral philosophy might not be a great way to do it, because we are a lot better at rationalizing, right, the values we already hold, constructing a rationally coherent story about why we hold the values we hold, than we are at actually changing our values. I think when don't try to trust social scientists making statements about philosophy too much, but when social scientists survey what happens to people when they study moral philosophy, they generally find there's not a whole lot of value change. And I think on most issues, on most moral issues, say donating to charity, moral philosophers, professors of moral philosophy don't tend to differ that much from the background population. I think the only exception is on vegetarianism, where moral philosophers are more likely to be vegetarians. But other than that, moral philosophers seem to hold pretty similar moral beliefs, or act as if they hold pretty similar moral beliefs to the background population, which seems to point to not a lot of actual value change going on as people study moral philosophy. In fact, if you have, say, bad values, creating this rational story behind why those values are right might make you even morally worse. I mean, well, it's sometimes dangerous to give examples because not everybody might agree, but like, compare Peter Thiel to your run-of-the-mill tech company, right? I think most people find Peter Thiel a lot more scary. Why? Because, well, he spent 4 years at Stanford Philosophy building together this rational justification for his moral values, which a lot of us find, but a lot of us still think those moral values are evil. The time he spent at Stanford just made him more sure about his moral values. So those are some reasons to think that studying moral philosophy might not be a great way to improve your moral values. But I mean, I think a lot of us think, well, it's still nice to have this rational coherent story about why we value what we value, right? Asking some questions, well, can't hurt, right? Now, if I were to put on my especially soulless utilitarian hat, and there are probably a good deal of utilitarians in this room, so hopefully maybe this might convince you a bit. I might say, well, you have to consider the opportunity cost, right? What could you have done with all that time and effort you put into studying moral philosophy while you were at college? And that's actually quite a lot of time and effort because, well, philosophy classes are kind of hard, right? It's quite hard to bullshit a philosophy essay. books you have to read or papers you have to read are often quite dense. And if you think you're good at parsing texts or writing essays, well, there's still the elementary logic piece that's to worry about. So if you're going to study moral philosophy, that's actually a pretty big investment of time and effort that you could have spent doing something else, right? And that means we had to ask whether it's worth it. Well, what else could you have done with the time? Well, one thing you could have done is you could have gotten better at whatever you plan on actually specializing in for your career, right? Let the division of labor work, become good at what you are really good at, become what you're really good at doing, what you're planning on doing full time, and leave moral philosophy to the moral philosopher. Well, what might come out of that? What's the benefit of doing that? Well, first of all, as I'm guessing that there's a lot of future STEM majors in this room, we know that scientific research and development has a lot of positive externalities, right? There are 7 billion people in the world, and that's a lot of possible beneficiaries for any new technological advancement. I mean, we just saw, right, with the COVID vaccine, how big those externalities can be. So if you are, right, if you have the potential to make a career in scientific research and development, there seems to be a pretty strong prima facie duty to become as good as you can be at doing that because of how big the potential benefits are. So, and that might not leave you a whole ton of time for doing moral philosophy. The other benefit of just investing more in doing whatever you'll be doing for your job better is, well, it'll increase your earnings, right? And well, what can you do with those earnings? Well, you probably should be donate it to charity. And the nice thing about that is that other people have spent a lot of time trying to quantify the impact of doing that. So we could put some actual numbers on our philosophic calculation since we're being sort of utilitarians here. According to GiveWell's latest estimates, the most effective charities in the field of global public health. So these are charities that are generally focused on improving the health of children in very poor countries. I think these ones are the Against Malaria Foundation, and I think a few other originally malaria-focused charities that have pivoted to other public health areas such as vaccinating children and vitamin A supplementation. So GiveWell's estimates are that these charities take about $3,000 to $5,000 to save a life of a child. I believe this figure used to be quite a bit lower. They started getting more donations in recent years, so they've been able to make a lot of progress on the sort of the easiest to solve cases. But it takes about, as of right now, it takes about $3,000 to $5,000 to save the life of a child. Well, that means that if, say, you took the time you spent studying moral philosophy in college, and you use it all to, say, become a better ML engineer or something like that, and you increase your earnings by, say, $5,000 a year, well, that's an additional child's life saved for, and you donate it off to charity, that's an additional life saved for about every year of the career. So my especially solely utilitarian argument is that when you study moral philosophy, you're not only wasting your time, you're also killing 40 children. So that's pretty bad, right? Um, so now that I've spent a few minutes talking about why we shouldn't study moral philosophy, I want to move to the case why we should. Why do we actually care about having this? Am I too soft or?
There's just a weird crackling.
Huh. I have.
Maybe try turning it down a bit. Yeah.
Okay. I don't really have a lot of control over my microphone, unfortunately. So just a built-in earphone microphone. So maybe, okay, maybe I just was talking too loud and that made it bad. It's possible. Okay, so I'll try to talk at a more moderated volume level. See if that helps. Okay, so let's try to turn to the case, see what the case for having a good coherent, rationally coherent story about why we value what we value is. Since well, we kind of got an answer because that's the whole utilitarian saying it's pretty pointless, right? That's with so much at stake. Well, okay. If I were a Kantian, this is what I would say. I'm not as much of a Kantian as I used to be, so this might be a bit difficult, but okay. So, well, we human beings, right? We like to think of ourselves as beings with agency of some sort, right? We believe that we are able to freely choose what we want to try to do, right? What we intend to do. I think most of us share that intuition, but that also seems to contradict with what we know about our brains, right? We know our brains are, well, physical objects and they obey the laws of physics, right? There are brain chemicals that there are neurons. So there are atoms in those brain chemicals and neurons. Those obey the laws of physics and would seem to be quite deterministic. There are clear laws of cause and effect that determine how they should act. And so, but the fact that we know that our brain's actions are deterministic seems to contradict, well, our intuitions that we have created. What are we supposed to make of that? Well, so if I have Immanuel Kant, I'll say this, right? Before we resolve this contradiction, we have to figure out what's actually at stake with this idea that we have agency, right? Let's figure that out first before we should figure out what's at stake in this paradox before we try to resolve it, right? And also, if I'm Immanuel Kant, I'll also try to claim that I can basically solve morality while trying to figure that out. We probably won't try to do that. But so what's at stake with agency? Well, one reason we might care about agency is that it allows us to have some idea about moral accountability, right? We generally think we should only hold other people accountable for things they really chose to do. If someone was not in their right mind, and right when they did something, or if they were coerced to do something, or if they just didn't intend to do something, we don't think they're less responsible for it. So we want people to be to have free agency because we want to be able to hold them morally accountable, right? And we also want to be able to persuade people with moral arguments, right? If Because if, we don't want, what we don't want to happen is say I give you a moral argument over why it's the right thing to help me with something, and then you're like, well, okay, that argument makes sense, but I don't have any agency anyway. So like, I'm sorry, the atoms in my brain are, prevent me from doing so. Like, we don't want people to be able to make excuses like that, right? We want to be able to hold people to account so that we can persuade them to do things that are moral, because we don't want to have our only option be to coerce people into doing things, right? We are, that would be a bad, bloody, violent world if the only option we had were coercion and we didn't have persuasion. So, right, like we wouldn't be able to treat human beings in a very dignified way if we were just coercing each other all the time whenever we wanted other people to do something we think they should do. So what we learned is that sort of what's at stake with our moral agency is it allows us to be persuaded to do things, right? That we are able to adopt moral principles that other people can convince us on, that we can talk about, argue about, reason about, right? Well, what kind of principles do those have to be? Well, concepts, they have to be sort of universal principles, right? They can't be principles that are, that can be true for me, but not for you. Because if that were the case, well, how are we supposed to talk about it if it's true for me, but not for you, right? How do we reason about it together? How do we argue about it? So these have to be principles that can be publicly justified, right? That's a relevant term for it in some way or another. They are universalizable. So that's part of what it means to. So we think, okay, that's part of what it means to have agency, right? We can act on principles that we can make some claim that these are universalizable, that these are reasonable, right? Kant would say that, right, when we act on these principles that have moral value of some type, we are universally legislating those principles, right? This moral action is communicative action. When we do things that have moral value, we are saying this is a reasonable thing to do. This is the right. We think that this is something that is the correct thing to do on some sort of publicly recognizable reason. And so in this framework, when we act on moral principles, we are making claims, and we are opening ourselves to being persuaded on those claims, because we know that persuadability is part of our dignity. And we are basically agreeing to sort of defend those claims in public. And while that puts some requirements on how we come to hold the principles that we hold. Because, well, let's say we got those principles secondhand. Well, the problem with hearsay is it's really hard to have a conversation with someone else about, to have an argument with somebody else about it if they don't trust the same people you trust, right? I mean, we see that in politics, right? If, like, a lot of us, if you want to be politically informed, it's very hard to make sense of all the events that are going on in the world right now, just on your own. So yeah, outsource some of your sort of political understanding to like pundits, right, of some sort. People who can do some of the analysis for you, right, that you can trust will give you accurate information. And if you want to be accurate, right, if you want to know a lot of stuff, like that's something you have to do. But seeing as different people, right, trust different pundits, right, you right, you talk to someone who, right, I tend to like listen to I would say a fairly center left sort of set of pundits, right? But if I talk to someone who watches Fox News or Newsmax, right, and they're listening to that set of pundits, well, we can make these claims at each other, right? But the arguments, we don't know why we believe this claims on it. Well, all we can say is, well, I heard it from this guy. You heard it from that guy. Neither of us trust, right, the guy you heard it from. Where we just can't resolve it, right? So, right, if we haven't, okay, thank you. So if we haven't, if we don't do a bit of our own thinking, well, we aren't able to do this work of public justification that we think it's important for us to do as moral agents. Now, so that would be what I would say as a Kantian. Of course, the other thing is, when I was giving a utilitarian argument, I was being a little bit sophistical. First of all, right, we look around the world. There's a lot of moral disagreement, right? This is a pluralistic world. So there may not be in many issues a strong consensus that you could actually point to and defer to. The other thing is that, well, there are a lot of new moral issues that we just haven't had any time to reach a consensus on, right? I mean, you have the two other panelists right now, the two other speakers of this conference talking about cultured meat, which never existed before, or life extension, which we haven't had to that before either. There's no real traditional consensus on something like AI either, right? And the other thing is, well, you can defer to other people, right? But other people are also deferring to you at the same time. And, well, we can't just have this infinite regression of deference, right? Especially since, well, we all vote. We live in democracy. We vote. That's one way other people are deferring to our sort of moral judgments, right? When we choose to accept the result of a legitimate election. And in the democracy, we also hopefully deliberate, right? We try to justify our view to other people. Now, of course, having views that are fully publicly justifiable, that's very hard. That's somewhat of an unreasonable ask for a lot of people. So there's still a balance we have to try to find. And I guess the question is, well, how? And I guess if people have thoughts of that, well, let's move to the Q&A.
Jack, you want to read? Yeah, there you go.
All right, thanks. Okay, so like Edgar said, we're opening up to Q&A. There is a question here that's asked if you personally think there is an objective morality. It's consistent.
I tend to be I lean towards moral universalism. That I think that there are we might not know what it is, but that's not really a reason to say it doesn't have a truth value.
I suppose as a follow-up question, if you could expand on, I guess, what are your personal moral views? That'd be maybe interesting.
Okay. Let's see. I mean, I would classify myself as like a mostly utilitarian, right? So now, of course, like that means that there's a lot of different ways to be utilitarian. There's like a lot of other beliefs that will influence what you believe on object level issues. You know, if you're utilitarian. Well, let's see. What are okay? Right. Okay. So, what can I say about? Okay, where do I differ from utilitarian, or why am I skeptical about utilitarianism? I guess. Number one, right? I'm not a utilitarian about beliefs, right? So, if like imagine Pascal's wager situation, right, where someone says, you know, you should believe in God, because of this, right? You should calculate utility of going to heaven, going to hell. Look at the small chances you should believe in God, right? I don't think that's actually, you know, you could that's an argument that maybe that believing in God, right, might increase your happiness, but that doesn't really seem to be an argument that believing in God is true. But I feel like if you take utilitarian far enough, you got to say, well, you need to believe in God in order to maximize your happiness, which I don't think, I'm not utilitarian about beliefs. I think you should believe things that are true and not. So that seems to be an exception to the general rule that that makes me somewhat skeptical. There's that. There's also a problem of second order beliefs, right? Say I enjoy, or say you enjoy doing certain types of acts because you believe that they help others, right? I think that, so I think that would it be justifiable to say, put other people in situations where they would require additional help just to give you the happiness of doing kind acts for them, right? Because so if you derive happiness from certain moral states, right? It seems that like for me to put that in, I'm doing some sort of double counting in there. That seems unreasonable. But it also seems to me that it's quite hard to say, well, what's the line between these, sorts of happiness that we can't double count and happinesses that we can't count? Okay. But so those are areas where I differ from utilitarianism. But I think, I don't know, does that, is that very informative about my actual moral beliefs? Or
Yeah, great. We're kind of running a little bit over time, so just one more quick question. What kind of people ought not to pursue moral philosophy, and should those people seek to transform into the kind of people who are ready?
Well, I mean, let's see. I mean, one thing is if there's something you are sure that it's really important for you to do, that's right. That's not moral philosophy, right? If you're an artist and you can right, and you have some idea of what great work you have to pursue. You have to pursue single-mindedly. That might not be time to become the moral philosopher. That's right. You might have other commitments that still override the commitment to truth seeking. Or, same thing maybe if you're a scientist, right? But is it possible to, how do you tell when you have an overriding commitment? That's, something I'm just not very sure on, right?